The last time anyone saw Daniel and Emily Miller together, they looked like a couple whose lives were wrapped in blessings. On Sunday mornings, they were the family people pointed to with quiet admiration. Daniel in a pressed shirt, Bible tucked under his arm. Emily with a gentle smile, their little daughter Lily on her hip, another baby on the way. They led prayer groups, organized food drives, and rarely missed a service at Grace Bridge Community Church in the small town of Maple Ridge. To most people, they were a picture of faith in action. Emily had grown up in a modest, loving home. Her parents didn't have much, but they had structure, hugs, and a deep belief that faith should show up in everyday kindness. She carried that with her into adulthood, teaching Sunday school, bringing casseroles to new mothers, listening patiently when people needed to talk. Daniel, on the other hand, had been the kind of young man people warned their daughters about until something in him seemed to change. In his late 20s, after what he described as a season of losing his way, he joined a men's Bible study. There, he met a quiet, soft-spoken Emily helping serve coffee. He was drawn to the way she listened more than she spoke, how she seemed to see the best in everyone. They married within a year. In the early days, their life was simple but joyful. Daniel worked as a project manager for a small construction firm. Emily worked part-time at a daycare, then left to stay home when Lily was born. Evenings were spent on their worn but comfortable couch, talking about dreams, future mission trips, and the big family they hoped to have. When Grace Bridge Community Church announced they wanted to plant new outreach programs on the other side of town, Daniel and Emily were the first to volunteer. They moved into a slightly older house in a quieter neighborhood, convinced that this was where God wanted them, a corner lot with a sagging fence and a big maple tree, close enough for church members to stop by for coffee and prayer. But moving also meant starting over. Emily found herself surrounded by new faces who all seemed to know one another already. The women at church were kind, but their friendships were already formed, their routines already set. Emily smiled, joined committees, and tried to fit into circles that sometimes felt politely closed. At home, she battled a sense of loneliness she couldn't admit out loud. The second pregnancy came with complications. Persistent nausea, dizzy spells, nights when the baby's kicks were so strong they left her breathless. While she tried to care for Lily, she also fought waves of anxiety that she kept carefully hidden behind a practiced smile. She needed Daniel more than ever. But as her belly grew, so did his distance. It started subtly. Extra hours at work. Unexpected late meetings. A phone buzzing that he'd glance at and turn face down on the table. Emily told herself it was just stress. The company was taking on bigger projects. The church was asking more of him. A man could only stretch so far. Still, she noticed the way his hugs became distracted. How he stopped reaching for her hand during evening walks. The way he seemed present in the room but far away behind his eyes. One evening, while folding laundry on the couch, she heard the front door open far later than usual. Daniel stepped in, smelling faintly of cologne and something she couldn't place, not sweat, not dust, not the familiar scent of fresh timber from his job sites. "Sorry I'm late," he said, dropping his keys in the shallow bowl by the door. "We had to go over some last-minute figures." Emily smiled, but her eyes drifted to his shirt. It was untouched by the grime that usually came with job visits. "I saved you dinner," she said softly. "It's in the oven." He kissed her forehead, already reaching for his phone as it vibrated. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. He turned away slightly, just enough to make the small hairs on the back of her neck stand up. That night, after he fell asleep, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing. The baby fluttered under her ribs as if restless, too. She told herself she was being dramatic, hormonal, unfair. "Everything is fine," she whispered in her mind. "He's tired. You're tired. This is just a season." It might have ended there, with uneasy questions and silent prayers. if not for what she found 3 weeks later, when she reached into his jacket pocket to do the laundry and her fingers brushed against a small, unfamiliar key. The key was cold and oddly heavy in Emily's palm, the kind meant for a rented mailbox rather than a house. At first, she tried to make sense of it. Maybe Daniel had opened one for work. Maybe the church needed a separate address for donations. She turned it over, studying the small stamped numbers, but they meant nothing to her. Still, something in her chest tightened. She placed the key on the counter and waited for Daniel to come home, intending to ask casually, to keep her voice light. But when he walked through the door that evening, he seemed tense, restless, pacing the small kitchen while telling her he had another, late meeting, the next night. The timing felt wrong. The excuses felt too familiar. So she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, the next morning, she dropped Lily off at a friend's house, buckled her seatbelt over her swollen stomach, and drove across town. The key had a tag with the name of a private mailbox center, the kind of place people used when they wanted things delivered quietly. Emily pulled into the parking lot, palms damp, heart pounding hard enough that she felt it in her throat. She told herself this was silly. She trusted her husband. She loved him. They prayed together. Raised their daughter together. Everyone had secrets, small ones, harmless ones. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt something shift. The clerk looked up from the counter and greeted her. Emily held up the key with a trembling hand. "My husband, he may have a box here. I just need to know the name on the account." The clerk shook his head politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't release customer information." Her stomach dropped. "Is there any way," she whispered, "to confirm if this key belongs here?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I can check that much." He disappeared into the back room. Those 30 seconds felt like a lifetime. When he returned, he set the key gently on the counter. "Yes," he said softly. "It matches one of our boxes." No further details. No explanations. Just confirmation that Daniel did indeed have something hidden, something he hadn't shared, something he had gone out of his way to conceal. Emily thanked him and walked back to her car in a daze. She sat there with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel while Lily's empty car seat reflected in the rearview mirror. Her mind ran through possibilities, excuses, reasonable explanations. None felt right. By evening, she had convinced herself not to confront Daniel. Not yet. She wanted more than a feeling. She needed certainty, because once she asked the question, their lives would change forever. And change was already swirling around her. As the weeks passed, Daniel's absences grew more frequent. Emily noticed unfamiliar charges on their bank statement, small but recurring. She saw him deleting messages the second his phone chimed. He grew impatient, distant, defensive when she asked harmless questions like, "Will you be home for dinner?" Or, "Should I plan on you helping tomorrow?" Then came the night she sat folding baby clothes on the living room floor, nesting instinct settling heavily in her bones. She heard Daniel telling someone on the phone he'd be there soon. His voice was low, urgent, nothing like the calm tone he used with coworkers or church members. When he left, she waited 10 minutes, then walked to the front window and watched him drive away. The tail lights disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone in a quiet house that suddenly felt too large, too hollow. She placed her hand on her belly. The baby's foot pressed back against her palm. "I'm trying," she whispered into the room. "I'm trying to keep this together." But deep down, she knew something had already broken. 2 weeks later, while searching for a receipt in Daniel's truck glove compartment, she found a pamphlet from an establishment miles outside town, an establishment known for things no one in their church would approve of. She froze, breath caught halfway in her chest, the words on the folded page burning into her eyes. It wasn't just a mailbox. It wasn't just late nights. It wasn't just stress. Daniel had a separate life, one he had worked carefully to keep her away from. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She lay curled on her side, hands over her stomach, tears slipping quietly into her pillow. She wasn't angry yet. She was hurt, exhausted, betrayed in ways she hadn't fully processed. And by morning, she made a decision. After the baby arrived, she would talk to Daniel about separating. Not in anger. Not in revenge. But because she could no longer stay married to a man she no longer recognized. She had no idea that this choice, a quiet, private decision forming in her heart, would become the spark that ignited the tragedy to come. The day their son, Noah, was born, the world felt briefly bright again. Emily held him against her chest in the dim hospital room, his tiny breaths warming the hollow beneath her collarbone. For a moment, she forgot about mailbox keys and secret trips. She forgot the late nights, the lies, and the constant ache of uncertainty. All she felt was the small weight of her son and the soft hum of hope settling over her like a blanket. Daniel stood near the foot of the bed, smiling for the nurse's camera, though the smile never reached his eyes. He held Noah briefly, awkwardly, almost like a man posing for a picture rather than cradling his newborn child. Emily watched him, feeling the gap between them widen even as they stood inches apart. Within days of returning home, the fragile peace cracked. Daniel grew restless, leaving the house for long stretches, claiming errands or work emergencies. Emily, healing from childbirth and juggling a newborn and a toddler, longed for his presence, someone to help, someone to steady her, someone to anchor a home that felt increasingly fragile. She tried to talk to him one evening after dinner, her voice soft but trembling. "Daniel," she said, "can we please spend more time together? I feel alone." He didn't look up from his phone. "I'm doing the best I can," he muttered. "Can we go back to counseling?" she tried. "Or talk to Pastor Lewis? Something." He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "I don't need counseling. I need you to stop imagining problems." Imagining. The word stung. He grabbed his keys and walked out without another word. That night, Emily sat on the edge of the couch with Noah asleep against her chest. A late summer storm rattled the windows, wind brushing the house with long, low whistles. Lily slept down the hall clutching her stuffed bear. The clock ticked past midnight before Emily finally drifted into a shallow sleep. But Daniel didn't come home until dawn. As days turned into weeks, Emily sensed an unspoken tension building inside the house, something sharp, something she couldn't name but felt every time she heard Daniel's footsteps in the hallway. Conversations were tight and clipped. Smiles were forced. Even the children seemed to sense the heaviness. Yet Emily kept her plan close to her heart. Once she recovered physically, she would ask for a separation. She imagined herself telling him gently, calmly. She imagined packing the children's clothes into small suitcases. She imagined living somewhere quieter, somewhere safer for her spirit. She never imagined violence. The night before everything changed, Emily wrote a short note in her journal, something she had been doing since Lily was born. Her handwriting wavered slightly across the page. "I need to find strength. I need to find peace for my children. I hope Daniel understands. I hope he chooses to be honest, whatever happens." She closed the journal and tucked it back into the drawer of her nightstand. The next morning began like any other. Lily colored at the kitchen table. Noah slept in his bassinet. Emily made toast while sunlight drifted through the blinds in soft golden stripes. Daniel was unusually quiet, moving through the house like a shadow rather than a husband. He avoided her eyes, answering her questions with one-word responses. Something simmered beneath his silence, a tension she felt but could not decipher. Around noon, he stepped outside to the driveway. Emily assumed he was checking the mail or taking a call. She wiped the counter, rocked Noah gently, and hummed a lullaby she barely remembered. She never heard Daniel re-enter the house. But neighbors later said they heard a noise, a sharp, sudden thud that startled birds from the maple tree and sent a dog barking down the street. Inside the Miller home, moments of calm shattered into chaos. The wooden table leg, splintered and already unstable, had come loose weeks earlier when Lily climbed on it. Daniel had set it aside in the garage, intending to fix it. Now it had become something entirely different, something investigators would later describe with careful, clinical distance. When Daniel finally called emergency responders, his voice was frantic. He claimed he had found Emily collapsed on the living room floor, already unresponsive, already beyond help. But when police arrived, the scene told a different story. The overturned bassinet. The blood spatter inconsistent with a fall. Emily's injuries, far too severe to be accidental. As paramedics rushed inside, Lily stood frozen near the hallway, clutching her stuffed bear, while baby Noah wailed from the living room floor where his blanket had slipped away. Daniel stood nearby with trembling hands, but not from grief. Because beneath the surface of his panic, investigators saw something else. A man already beginning to craft a story that would soon unravel completely. Officers stepped carefully around the living room, their boots silent against the hardwood floor as they took in the scene. The air was still, heavy, as if the house itself understood something terrible had happened within its walls. Emily lay motionless, her soft brown hair fanned across the floor. A blanket, likely dropped in the chaos, was half caught under the edge of the coffee table. The room showed signs of a struggle no one could mistake. Furniture slightly shifted, a chair tipped, small items scattered as though knocked aside. Daniel hovered nearby, hands shaking, voice strained. I found her like this, he repeated, each time with slight variations. I walked in and she wasn't breathing. But his words didn't match his eyes, unfocused, darting, avoiding the paramedics who tried desperately to revive Emily before finally stepping back, exchanging grim looks. Detective Ryan Carter arrived moments later. He was calm, methodical, a man who had walked into scenes like this more times than he ever wanted to remember. He approached Daniel with a measured tone. Sir, I need to ask you a few questions. Daniel nodded, wiping his face, though no tears marked his skin. Where were you this afternoon? I went out for errands, Daniel said. Came back and saw her like this. What kind of errands? Daniel hesitated. Just normal things. Groceries. Mail. But Ryan noticed a detail Daniel didn't expect anyone to see, faint reddish smudges near his left wrist, hastily washed but still visible under harsh light. Emily's mother arrived shortly after, rushing across the lawn with terror etched into her features. Officers stopped her gently as she cried out her daughter's name. Lily clung to her grandmother, trembling and confused. Noah, now carried by a paramedic, cried softly as he was taken to safety. Inside, the investigation moved quickly. A splintered table leg was found hidden behind the couch, not thrown, not discarded carelessly, but placed. That alone raised questions. Clean spots on the floor, where something had clearly been wiped, raised more. And when they inspected Daniel's truck, something became undeniable. In the back seat, beneath a folded tarp, officers found faint traces of blood, not enough to be obvious, but enough for lab testing to confirm it belonged to Emily. The house, the vehicle, and Daniel's story were no longer aligning. When confronted, Daniel insisted he had panicked while trying to move Emily to check for breathing, claiming that was how the blood transferred. But the patterns didn't match desperation, they matched concealment. Detectives also retrieved surveillance footage from nearby businesses to piece together Daniel's timeline. What they found shocked even seasoned investigators. Hours before Emily was found, Daniel had driven not toward any grocery store or supply shop, but toward an area miles away, the same area connected to the mysterious pamphlet Emily had discovered, the same area investigators would later learn he had visited many times while living his so-called faithful family life. His alibi was collapsing. Back at the station, Daniel sat in a small interview room, fingers tapping his knee, voice quieter now as he tried to answer Detective Carter's questions. "Daniel," Carter said steadily, "we know your timeline doesn't match. We know you weren't where you said you were. We know there's evidence in your vehicle that shouldn't be there." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't do anything. I loved my wife." But Carter had seen this before, the defensive posture, the rehearsed lines, the way Daniel's eyes flickered when pressed. A man cornered by truth rarely held steady. By evening, the results from the preliminary crime scene review came in. The injuries Emily sustained were not consistent with a fall, an accident, or any explanation Daniel had offered. They were consistent with force, deliberate, repeated. Still, officers followed protocol. Daniel was formally taken into custody for questioning related to the incident, though no final charges were filed that night. He was released under strict conditions while the investigation continued. For a brief moment, he walked free. But Maple Ridge was no longer the quiet town he once navigated with confidence. Whispers spread quickly, at the church, at the grocery store, in the school parking lot. People who had once admired the Miller family now exchanged looks heavy with worry, confusion, even fear. Emily's family mourned privately, holding Lily and Noah close as arrangements were made. The community brought meals, flowers, handwritten cards, all the outward signs of sympathy, yet beneath their kindness, a question loomed over every conversation. What had really happened inside the Miller home? Detectives continued tracing Daniel's movements, his secret mailbox, and the establishment he had frequented in the months before Emily's passing. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of a double life, one vastly different from the devoted husband he pretended to be. And the more investigators uncovered, the more certain they became. Emily's final day had not been a tragic accident. It had been the culmination of months of hidden behavior, unraveling lies, and a man desperate to keep control as everything around him began to crumble. Detectives worked steadily, building a timeline that left almost no room for doubt. They subpoenaed records from the private mailbox center. They traced Daniel's financial activity. They pulled surveillance footage from gas stations, traffic cameras, and businesses near the out-of-town establishments he had visited. Piece by piece, the image sharpened. Daniel had been living two separate lives, slipping away under the guise of church errands and late meetings. His secret world stood in stark contrast to the upright, wholesome persona he displayed at Gracebridge Community Church. The evidence told a story Daniel could no longer control. When investigators returned to his truck with forensic tools, they uncovered additional traces of blood soaked into the fibers beneath the rear floor mat. Hidden, but not enough to escape detection. At the same time, lab analysis confirmed the table leg found behind the couch bore microscopic fragments of Emily's hair. Detective Carter reviewed every detail with a quiet, measured determination. The more he read, the more the shape of the truth emerged, not in a dramatic reveal but in a cold, steady accumulation of facts that pointed in one direction. Within days, officers arrested Daniel Miller for the taking of Emily's life. The news spread through Maple Ridge like a shockwave. The church community, stunned, gathered for emergency prayer vigils. Friends who once welcomed Daniel into their homes now avoided eye contact at the store. Some whispered that there must be a mistake. Others said nothing at all, afraid of how easily appearances could lie. Daniel spent his first night in a county holding cell pacing the floor, insisting to officers that he had been framed, misunderstood, misinterpreted. But when confronted with the growing list of discrepancies, his shifting story, the secret mailbox, the unexplained trips, the evidence in his truck, he grew defensive, then quiet. Still, he maintained his innocence. For the sake of the children, Emily's family pushed for the truth to come quickly. They attended every hearing, sitting in the front row, hands clasped tightly together. Lily, only 4 years old, told relatives she missed her mother's songs. Baby Noah reached for faces that blurred with time, too young to understand the emptiness left in his mother's absence. After weeks in detention, Daniel's attorney secured his temporary release on bail. He returned to a house stripped of warmth, a home where the air still held memories he could not outrun. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as he carried a single duffel bag inside. No one approached him. No one spoke his name. But behind his front door, Daniel's inner world began to unravel. The pressure mounted, legal fees, public scrutiny, the weight of the investigation closing in. He no longer had the double life to distract him. The secrets he once guarded so carefully now stared him directly in the face. Nights became sleepless. Days stretched into a fog of fear and denial. Then one evening, officers were dispatched to his home again, not for violence this time, but for a failed attempt to end his own life. He was found unconscious but breathing, rushed to the hospital, and placed under psychiatric supervision. The event raised another red flag for prosecutors. A man confident in his innocence did not usually collapse under the weight of circumstances he claimed were fabricated. After stabilization, Daniel returned to jail to await the next phase of the proceedings. His posture had changed. Shoulders hunched. Eyes vacant. The defiance he once displayed had dimmed into resignation. The district attorney prepared for trial, gathering testimony from neighbors, church members, and medical experts. Surveillance footage documenting Daniel's secret activities was added to the case file. Prosecutors were ready to present a compelling narrative, a husband leading a hidden life, frightened of losing control, taking out that fear on the one person who threatened to expose the truth. Daniel's defense team saw the writing on the wall. Faced with overwhelming evidence, they encouraged him to consider a plea. Weeks of quiet meetings followed, Daniel sitting across from his attorneys with folded hands and a distant stare, saying little, offering even less. And then, without emotion, without resistance, he finally agreed. He would not go to trial. He would accept a plea deal for a long-term sentence. It was the closest he ever came to admitting what had truly happened in the Miller home. When the agreement was finalized, Emily's family embraced one another with trembling relief. Justice had not restored what was taken from them, but it carved a space where truth could settle, where grief could begin to heal. Yet even with the legal battle ending, the tragedy was far from over. 2 children had lost their mother in a moment of devastating cruelty, and now, they were losing their father to the consequences of his own actions. The story of the Millers was no longer a tale of faith and community. It had become a story of loss layered upon loss, a tragedy that Maple Ridge would never forget. On the morning of Daniel's sentencing, the courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers and the distant hum of the air vents. The judge read through the terms of the plea agreement while Daniel stood motionless between his attorneys, hands clasped, shoulders drooping. He didn't look at Emily's family. He didn't look at the gallery. He stared straight ahead, as if the world beyond the courtroom no longer existed. The sentence was long, decades behind bars. Emily's mother closed her eyes as tears rolled down her cheeks. Her husband wrapped an arm around her, steadying her trembling shoulders. They weren't tears of celebration. They were tears for a daughter who should have grown old, for grandchildren who would grow up knowing loss before they knew much else about life. Daniel said nothing when given the opportunity to speak. No apology. No explanation. Not even a word of sorrow. Only a small nod, barely visible, as if accepting a fate he had finally stopped fighting. He was escorted out in handcuffs, disappearing through a side door that echoed shut behind him. Life moved on, slowly, unevenly. Lily and Noah went to live with Emily's family, surrounded by gentle routines and a home full of framed photographs of the mother they would one day learn about not through memories, but through stories. Lily often asked why her mommy couldn't come back. Noah, still too young to remember anything clearly, grew up with a vague sense of a missing piece, something he couldn't name. At Gracebridge Community Church, Pastor Lewis dedicated a memorial garden corner to Emily, a place where soft yellow flowers bloomed each spring. Congregants visited often, leaving handwritten notes and small wooden crosses. The church never stopped praying for the children, lifting their names in quiet whispers each Sunday. Meanwhile, inside the state penitentiary, Daniel's life dwindled into a rigid pattern of routines, meals, cell checks, the hollow rhythm of days blending into one another. The man who had once stood confidently at church podiums now ate silently in the corner of the cafeteria, a shell of the person he'd been years earlier. As time passed, his health deteriorated. Stress, isolation, and years of internal turmoil carved deep lines across his face. Guards noted that he rarely spoke, rarely wrote letters, rarely interacted at all. He lived in quiet surrender, as though trying to fade piece by piece. One morning, years into his sentence, Daniel was found unresponsive in his cell. Medical staff rushed in, but the efforts were brief. He had passed away during the night. There was no struggle, no note, no explanation. Just an ending that settled over the prison like a long, heavy sigh. When Emily's family received the news, their reaction was complicated. Relief. Sadness. Finality. Another loss, different from the first, but still connected. They chose not to attend any proceedings related to his burial. Instead, they focused on the children, on building a life that honored Emily's gentle spirit, her kindness, her quiet strength. Lily grew into a thoughtful, observant girl who loved drawing hearts and angels. Noah became energetic and curious, often running through the backyard with a toy truck and a determined grin. Their grandparents surrounded them with love, shielding them from the darkest details until they were old enough to understand. Maple Ridge eventually settled back into its quiet routines, but the Miller case lingered in the town's memory, whispered at community gatherings, spoken softly during church potlucks, recalled each time someone passed the house on the corner lot with the old maple tree. People remembered Emily's warmth, her soft laugh, the way she always tried to see the good in others. They remembered how quickly a life built on faith could unravel when secrets were allowed to grow in the shadows. And they remembered the children, innocent, blameless, who lost both parents in the same tragic spiral. In the end, the story of Daniel and Emily Miller wasn't just about deception or violence. It was about the quiet tremors that appear long before a collapse, the signs overlooked, the wounds hidden beneath polite smiles. It was a reminder that even the most admired lives can hold fractures unseen by those who stand beside them. In a town built on fellowship and faith, the Miller tragedy became a lasting lesson, that truth, no matter how painful, must be faced, because the cost of ignoring it can tear a family apart forever.